Hi, Big Hara here with another installment of my video blog. It's been a little while, but Halloween approaches, so what better topic than horror gaming? Okay, first of all, there are a lot of different horror RPG systems out there to choose from. I'm just going to rattle off a short list of a few and understand that there are many others, and I'm by no means saying these are necessarily the best. If you've been around the tabletop RPG scene for any length of time, chances are you've heard of Call of Cthulhu. This is the go-to horror game, and it's a great one, and it's a lot of fun. One of the beauties of this game is it doesn't really matter whether you have the 5th edition or the 6th edition or the 4th edition or what have you. It pretty much all works together. Most of it's just editing changes, and it hasn't really changed that much in years. And it's a great game, and I love playing it. Now, there's also a lot of other games out there. There are things like World of Darkness, Chill, All Flesh Must Be Eaten. Recently, Goblinoid Games, the people who do Labyrinth Lord Retro Clone, came out with Rot World, another zombie type game, and that's a lot of fun too. I've read it, not played it, but it's pretty cool. And there's a ton of others. But the point being, there's no shortage of horror-based or horror-themed role-playing game systems out there. Now, that being said, there are some different kinds of horror games you can play in terms of the type of adventures or the tone you're setting or the kind of horror you're using in your game. You have your classic H.P. Lovecraft kind of cosmic horror. This is where you have things like cultists summoning elder gods and demons and real end-of-the-world, super-duper supernatural kind of horror that's way beyond the level of there's a monster to fight. Pretty much if the monster shows up, it's all over because you're not going to defeat it. You're not going to take on Cthulhu in a melee combat. You know, that kind of thing. That's your cosmic horror. You have what I call your haunted house horror, which is a little more down to earth. It's a little more approachable from the perspective of an evil to defeat. And that's your things like your Draculas, your mummies, your werewolves, your ghosts. It could be literally a haunted house. It could be, you know, a graveyard at midnight, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, things like that, where it's supernatural. It's not just bad guys, but it's not this overarching, eternal, insurmountable evil, end of the world as you know it kind of thing. And that can be a lot of fun too. You also have what I refer to, even taking it down another notch in some ways, as slasher horror. And this is your Texas Chainsaw Massacre, your Jack the Ripper, things like that, Freddy Krueger. And by the movies and things like that, especially when you get into things like, you know, Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and that kind of stuff, there is a supernatural element to that. You know, Freddy Krueger attacks you in your dreams and stuff like that. But it is the idea that it's a bad guy. And can be even more approachable from the perspective of an evil to be defeated. You also have, which I think deserves sort of its own separate mention, even though it kind of ties into the haunted house and cosmic horror, depending on exactly how you want to define it, the zombie apocalypse. And this is a very popular genre. This is popular outside of the RPG stream at this point. You've got shows and movies and zombie walks and so many different things going on using this sort of theme. I've mentioned in previous broadcasts that I personally feel like this genre has been overdone and I'm kind of sick of it, but some people have fun with it, and if you're having fun, that's what counts. Okay, when playing or running a horror game, like any game, you have a couple choices to make. One of these choices is whether you're going to run a short game, like a one-shot or a very short adventure, or a long, extended, ongoing campaign. For my part, I find horror more satisfying in short doses. This has mostly to do with the idea of the ability to sustain fear or build tension. It's very difficult to do over a long period of time. If you keep building and building and building and building for a long time before there's finally a payoff of one kind or another, it's going to be tough to maintain, and it can get just, you know, stressful and wearing, even if you are successfully building or maintaining the tension. If you have the fear build up and then something scary happens and then you start over and you reset and fear builds up and just over and over and over and over, well, it gets diminishing returns in my experience. So I like a horror one-shot. I like a short adventure that's a horror-based adventure, and then, you know, you're done. Everybody's dead or insane, or maybe you beat the bad guy or what have you, but then it's over. But I think both are possible. I just personally have found, in cases where I've played in a horror game or I've tried to run something with elements of horror, that it's very difficult to maintain over a longer period of time. Now, tied to the idea of building and sustaining tension is the idea of player fear versus character fear. Character fear is pretty straightforward. You have mechanics in the game, things like sanity points, saving throws versus fear effects, corruption, what have you. And you can have all sorts of mechanics in the game system for that. So you can say your character experienced something which would induce terror. Make your saving throw or whatever similar mechanic is there, and if you failed, you are afraid. And these are the effects of afraid. You run away for X number of rounds, you lose this many sanity points, you wet your pants, whatever it is, that happens to you. And because the dice said this, it happens. That's character fear or sanity or whatever you want to call it. Character horror, to use sort of an overarching term. Player horror is a little different. This is when you're trying to take it out of the game and to the player. And if the player or players are not emotionally invested or interested in it, it's not going to gel. I always liken it to the idea of going to a scary movie. Somebody says, hey, let's go see, it's the end of the freaking world because the monsters are here, part 6. And you say, excellent. And you go to this movie. Now, sure, you know it's a movie. And you know it's fake. And you know that the monsters are either CGI or a dude in a rubber suit or what have you. And you may be there to a certain level to sit there and laugh and joke about it with your friends. If you go to a scary movie because you want to see something scary, then you are emotionally investing in that film to a certain degree, or that TV show, or whatever it is. You want to be scared. And if you don't want to be scared, you can just keep your emotional distance and barriers up, and you can just say, nah, dude in a rubber suit, it's so stupid looking. That can be fun, but you're not going to get scared. I mean, if you're a grown-up, or unless something about that movie touches one of your hot buttons, like if you have a phobia or something like that, like if you're an arachnophobe and it's all a bunch of spiders in 3D crawling all over everything, you might freak out a little, but that's more about you individually and less about the movie. So, without the players in the game being willing to kind of, let their emotions come into play and to invest in that a little bit and be willing to be scared, there's not going to be a lot of the fear. I will say that a sort of the least you can do as a player in this situation, if you're not interested in really being scared, even though everybody said let's play a horror game and everybody said excellent and you showed up anyway, the least you can do is role play your character appropriately. Meaning, even if you personally aren't freaking out, which is okay. Maybe the game just isn't that good. Maybe you're just not freaking out. You can at least not ruin it for everybody else. You can role play your character as if he's scared. You can think about what your character would be feeling in this situation and say, yeah, my guy's just some guy off the street. He's not, he doesn't know what's going on. He would be freaking out. Role play it as freaked out, even if you personally aren't. And it'll still be fun. I do think that role-playing in horror can be one of the more role-playing intensive kinds of games because of that. Because you're dealing with a situation where not only are you dealing with emotions like, fear and potentially actually making the player actually feel a little freaked out. Not actually scared the monster's going to jump off the table and get him, but just like, ooh, that's creepy. Getting under their skin a little. Not only are you dealing with that, but you're also dealing with the idea of a loss of control. And a lot of players really don't like when they feel like they're out of control of their character. But that's part of what you're signing on for in a horror game. I want to talk a little bit about ways to make the players feel a little uncomfortable, get under their skin a little bit. Some people use things like lighting and props, background music or sound effects. There's all sorts of things like that you can do. I am not a big fan of those, and there are a couple reasons why. One, a lot of times players will fixate on the prop and they're not really paying attention to the game. This is true with minis and scenery. I've talked about this in the past. There's also the fact that props are a lot of work, and if you're not going to be using them very often, you may not have time to do a lot with that, and that's totally cool. And if you don't have time to do it really well, if they're fixating on the prop and the prop doesn't work that great, then you pick some music, some background music you think is really spooky, but somebody else thinks it's just cheesy, and so they're distracted by the music that's not really actually doing its job. And this comes into the main reason I tend to shy away from things like the props and stuff like that when it comes to horror. And it has to do with the idea that, and I'm not the one who originally said this, there really isn't anything you can do or say or describe, like if you're trying to read flavor text or show them a picture or anything like that, that's going to be as scary as what they're going to come up with in their own imagination. I find that it's far more effective when someone just gives you broad strokes and then you're filling in the blanks. I believe it actually talks about this in an aside in the Call of Cthulhu rulebook. Don't tell them what the monster looks like in detail. They caught a shadowy glimpse, that's it. Was that the monster, or was that just one tentacle and it's actually as big as the house? You don't know. Is that slime on the floor? Did it leave that trail? Is that oozing from its skin? Or is that what's left of its last victim? You don't know. And the less you know, the less control you have. Because knowledge is power. And the more unknowns there are, the more room there is for fear. Now, not everyone thinks that's a good time. And that's totally cool. But if you're playing horror, you are, in theory, looking for that fear. You're looking for a little bit of the willies. That's what you're after. You're after the sensation of being scared. It's why you go on a haunted hayride. It's why you go to a scary movie. It's why you read a scary book. You're looking for that little thrill of fear. Another point I should mention, and this ties into character fear, is in most horror gaming, your characters are somewhat less heroic in their power levels and their abilities and even in their backgrounds. You're not a mighty warrior necessarily. There's a reason in Call of Cthulhu it refers to the player characters as investigators. It's not so much about being a mighty warrior or a powerful wizard or something like that. You're not an adventurer. You are looking into something weird. You're trying to figure out what's going on here. You're trying to get to the bottom of a mystery for whatever reason, or reasons in the case of a party. Maybe one person has one reason, one person has another. And that can be fun role play. The other thing about being an investigator is the idea that because knowledge is power, the more you know about what's going on, the more likely you are to be able to avert disaster or whatever. Because in a good horror game, for me, the players, and thus the characters, have a chance to either set things right or stop things from going wrong. But it's not a foregone conclusion, and the way you do it isn't necessarily wade in with your broadsword and just, kill the bad guys. You can, blow a zombie's head off with your shotgun, and that's great, and the zombie's dead. But if it's a zombie apocalypse game, there are more coming. And the issue isn't killing the individual zombies. The issue is, why are these zombies here in the first place, and how do you stop them from? How do you stop it from spreading? How do you end the source of the problem? And if you haven't gathered the information, if you haven't solved the mystery, you're not going to stop the evil. And there's a good chance that even if you win, quote unquote, that because of the bizarre, supernatural, or whatever nature of what you were doing, people may not even believe you. That's one of my favorite aspects of something like Cthulhu, and that goes into the sanity aspect, where you're trying to explain, no, I had to blow up the house because of the secret tunnels to the underworld that were beneath it. And they're like, oh, of course you did. You know what? There's someone you should talk to about that right over here in this padded room. But you know the truth because you were there. They're the ones that are crazy, not you. That's the fun of a horror game to me, or at least part of it. But everybody finds something else scary, and there's no one right way to do it. But my recommendation is it's still a week or so before Halloween. Dust off your Cthulhu book and play a horror game if you don't normally, because it can be a lot of fun. That's all for now. Talk to you later.